Hey everyone, today I want to talk about the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is a tool that helps us solve for any quadratic in any form, anywhere, right? So the quadratic formula helps us get the solutions. And solutions are in red here, and they're also known as x-intercepts, zeros, and roots. So those are really important terms in vocabulary for solutions. So please know that those things are all the same. Now, when we talk about the quadratic formula, it's kind of a beast. Remembering it is going to be really super helpful, but in terms of understanding what its pieces are, you'll probably get this on formula sheets regardless of where you are and where you're taking this, this quadratic stuff, right? So let's get right into the formula. Here's the formula. Told you, it's a beast. So we have x equals, remember x obviously is what I'm trying to solve for, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. I know that's a lot. Over time, it will be easier to understand. Now, in a separate video, we'll talk about this piece under the radical, this b squared minus 4ac. That's called the discriminant, and it's actually incredibly important when we talk about what kinds of solutions you're going to get in a quadratic. But for now, let's just stick to the basics. Now, these letters, they should be somewhat familiar to you, a, b, and c. Well, when we talk about a quadratic, this is the standard form of a quadratic function. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now, certainly I can interchange the plus signs for a minus sign or any combination of plus and minus. But a is the initial coefficient of that first term. So our a value, and remember we talked about when solving a is 1 and when a is greater than 1, this is what we're talking about. B is the middle term, right? And it is the number, the coefficient directly in front of x, and then c is going to be our constant value. So this here, this standard form, should not be completely unfamiliar to you because we have messed around with a, b's, and c's before. So let's get right into some problems. Again, I'll put the formula up here for easy use. Example 1, 2m squared plus 2m minus 12 equals 0. It may be beneficial in the beginning to label your points, right? So this initial 2 is going to be our a value. This second 2 is b, and negative 12 is c. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to input things into the formula and use a calculator to help us do the majority of the work for us. So this is going to be x equals negative b, right? So if this is a positive, I'm going to plug in a negative 2 here, all right? Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. And that's all going to be over 2 times a, or 2 times 2. Now, let's simplify this just a little bit so we can see what we're going to put in the calculator. This is going to be x equals negative 2 plus or minus 4 minus 4 times 2 times negative 12 over 4. Now, here's what I mean by entering things in the calculator. This whole square root thing, put this entire square root as shown in the calculator, because that is going to be the majority of any mistakes that you make when we talk about solving with the quadratic formula. So I'm going to put this entire thing in the calculator. The square root of 4 minus 4 times 2 times negative 12. And that is going to give me 10. Just 10. So this is going to end up being a really nice quadratic for us. So here we have x equals negative 2 plus or minus 10 over 4. Now, the plus or minus, and if we think back to completing the square, in terms of two solutions, we're going to have to do this twice. So I have a negative 2 plus 10 over 4. So let's do that first. Well, negative 2 plus 10 is 8, divided by 4 is 2. So my first solution is 2 for this quadratic. Now let's go back and do this when it's a negative 10. Because remember, it's plus or minus. So negative 2 minus 10 is negative 12 over 4, which is negative 3. So the solutions to this quadratic function are 2 and negative 3. Now, that was an easy one because we didn't have to do any weird simplification. Let's try another one and see what we get. 8 is going to be my a value, 6 is going to be b, and 5 is going to be c. Let's plug in what we know. X is going to equal negative b, so again, I'm going to switch the sign here. Negative 6 plus or minus the square root of, I'm going to go ahead one extra step so I don't have to go and do this one. 6 squared is 36. You really don't want to put the square in the calculator because if you put a negative in, it is going to throw you off a little bit, right? So it may be beneficial to do that square in your head or off to the side. We know that 6 times 6 is 36. Minus 4 times a, which is 8, times c, which is 5. And that's going to be all over 2 times a, which is going to be 2 times 8, or 16. Let's plug in the radical in the calculator. 36 minus 4 times 8 times 5. Okay, my calculators give me a non-real solution, meaning error, which means we're going to have an imaginary solution here. So here's what we're looking for. In cases that this doesn't work with a normal number or an integer, we're going to put everything in the calculator again without this square root. So in this terms, I'm actually going to just put the discriminant, because the discriminant is only the b squared minus 4ac part. It's not the square root part. So we're going to put just this part in the calculator, because again, I'm going to have a nasty imaginary here. So 36 minus 4 times 8 times 5. That's going to give me a negative 124. So here is what we're at. X is going to equal negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 124 all over 16. Okay, now, with this negative 124, I need to see if I can pull out any perfect squares. It looks like 4 is divisible, so 4 is going to have to come out, but I want to see if there's a bigger number. So I know that 124 divided by 4 is going to be 31. Now, 31 is actually a prime number. I can't multiply anything by it, so that's what I'm going to be looking for here. So let's simplify this and clean this up a little bit. This is going to be x equals negative 6 plus or minus. Now, when I break down the square root of negative 124, we got a couple things going on here. This is going to be the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 31. And again, I took that I out because, or that negative 1 out because I'm going to have an I value. This is going to be I times 2 times the square root of 31. So when I plug all this in and put this all together, I'm going to get 2I root 31. That will simplify from the discriminant to this level to here. And that's going to be all over 16. Now, we're not done yet with this nightmare problem because I have 3 numbers that are divisible by at least a 2 here. That negative 6, that 2, and that 16. I can divide by 2 on all 3 of these terms. So I'm going to have no space. We're close. When I divide by 2 on all of these, I'm going to have a negative 3 plus or minus I root 31 all over 8. That is actually my final answer. So let's recap what we did real quick for this one, because this one was way nastier than this one. I plugged in all of my numbers into the formula, but I had to stop and back up a little bit because I would have had a negative under the radical sign. So we went back and just did the discriminant, so I had a negative 124 here. I simplified the square root of negative 124 into negative 1 times 4 times 31 and got my values there, which will give me an imaginary solution. And yes, we're going to need to have I instead of decimals because decimals are not going to be exactly what we're looking for. We are looking for exact values, which are either whole number integers, fractions, or radical signs. Let's try 2 more. Okay, try example 3. Dust. My first 3 here is going to be A, negative 6 is B, and this positive 3 is C. We'll plug things into the formula, so X is going to equal negative B. Now, B is negative here, which means I'm just going to flip the sign. So this is just going to be a positive 6 plus or minus the square root of B squared. So again, negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36, not negative. Minus 4 times A, which is 3, times C, which is 3 again. And that's going to be all over 2 times A, which is 2 times 3, which is 6. So let's plug things into the calculator and see where we're at. And again, I'm going to plug in this entire thing. 36 minus 4 times 3 is 0. And that's interesting. So when we have a 0 here, that means there's only going to be one solution. So let's look at that real quick, right? So this is going to be x equals 6 plus or minus 0 over 6. So we're going to get really good with the discriminant in a future video, right, which is coming soon. Now, when this number simplifies to 0, there's only one solution for this quadratic, which means this quadratic function, if I looked at it on a graph, actually sits on top of the x-axis, meaning it only touches it at one point. So And the reason, or the backup of that is 6 plus 0 is 6, and 6 minus 0 is also 6, right? So there's only one solution here because we can actually negate the 0, it doesn't matter. 6 divided by 6 is 1. That's the only solution for this quadratic function, just 1, okay? Go ahead and try number 4, pause me, and I'll come back with the work. Okay, so if you got negative 1 plus or minus root 10 over 2, I'm super impressed. And here's why. We didn't have a negative under the radical for the discriminant, but we did have a simplifiable radical. So off to the side here, I simplified the square root of 160, and that's going to be 16 times 10, right? Well, the square root of 16 is perfect, which is why we took it out of the 160, so it's going to be 4 times root 10. Now, I plugged back in my values here of negative 4 plus or minus 4 root 10, but because I can't simplify that, because I can't add them, I'm just going to simplify. Now, that negative 4, that 4, and that 8 all have something in common, which is a 2. So I'm going to be, it's going to be a 4. I divided by 4 on all 3 terms, which will give me the negative 1 plus or minus. That really would be a 1 in front of that root 10, but I don't have to write it, okay? So let's finish up. Okay, things to remember about this video. Number 1, remember the formula. The quadratic formula should be given to you on all kinds of quizzes, tests, and all other homework assignments, but it would be a lot easier to remember it just in case you don't get it. Number 2, the formula will always, always, always give you the solutions to a quadratic function, no matter what the inputs are. And then number 3, let the calculator do the majority of the work for you. I realize that I is not a thing on most calculators, if not all of them. So you're going to have to recognize when the discriminant, the thing under the radical, is going to give you a negative. And if that happens, just back up and do it again without the radical sign. See you next time.